I want to talk today about RFID tags in libraries. They're a really convenient tool that more and more libraries are using, but as we're going to discuss, there are actually a lot of security risks and privacy concerns when it comes to RFID tags.
Excuse me, sir. Forgot your receipt.
Checkout lines. Who needs them?
Have a nice day.
This is the future of e-business.
This is an IBM commercial from 1999, and I love it because it envisions the possibility of a future using RFID tags. This suspicious-looking fella who's moving through the store, picking up items and tucking them in his pockets, knows that what he's picking up is RFID enabled. There are tags on there that are sending out little radio frequencies. And he would also have a form of payment on him that has RFID. So perhaps his credit card then is RFID enabled. So that when he walks through that gate at the end of the commercial, everything gets read. All the tags on the things that he wants to buy, his payment information, everything gets read, and checkout is instantaneous. And it's a huge time saver. It's a huge labor saver. And why wouldn't we want to use this? This looks great. Let's take a minute and talk about what RFID is and how it works. RFID stands for Radio Frequency Identification, and you can see I've pictured off to the side what that might look like in a library setting. But RFID is actually really easy to embed and use, so it can really look differently depending on the context where it's being used. What's happening with these tags is they're emitting low-frequency radio waves. And then when they come within proximity of an RFID reader, this reader is creating an electromagnetic zone, and that will receive the radio waves and decode them. Off to this side here again, let me just point out a couple of different ways that libraries are using this. Those larger round stickers, those go on CDs or DVDs. And it's actually a really great way to tell if your disc is in the case. I don't know if you are prone, like I am, to returning cases without the discs in them, but yeah, I tend to do that, and it's actually really nice to know that as soon as I try to check it in and it won't check in, oh, I must have left that disc at home in the DVD player again. I guess I better go get that before I try to return it. It's a time saver because I don't have to be notified by the library that I've forgotten my DVD again. Then next to that, there are these little square stickers, and these are so great and so versatile because, as you can see, you can stick them inside a book, obviously, but libraries check out a lot more than just books. For instance, my library checks out ukuleles, or sewing machines, or laptop computers, or tablets, e-readers, that kind of thing. And not all of those have something that you could stick in a book, but all of them can have a sticker stuck to them. So these great little RFID tags can stick right to an object and not be in the way, and they're really, really easy to use. There is also a proximity card. There are, in my library, staff areas where patrons can't go. I don't think that's unusual. But they're generally locked, and all I have to do in order to get through them is just tap that proximity card on an RFID reader, and it will unlock the door for me. So these are some ways that libraries are using RFID tags, but you may see them looking really differently in your own daily life. If you have a credit card that you only have to tap to pay, that's using RFID or another similar technology. I know when I was attending the University of Utah, we were given free transit pass as part of our tuition. So what they would do is they would embed RFID into our student IDs. And when we went to go ride the bus or the track system, all we would have to do is take that student ID and just tap it on a little console at the front of the bus or on the track station, and it would give us a little green light and we could go ahead and ride. Now that was drawing direct information about my student profile, and so as soon as I stopped being an active student when I graduated and was no longer taking classes, they just turned off my ability to use the RFID to ride tracks and buses. And so if I were to go and tap my student ID now, it would give me a red and say, no, you can't ride, sorry, you're out of luck, you have to pay. So these are just a few of the ways that RFID is being used. They're really creative, really convenient, but they can also be problematic. First, I want to talk about the good parts. And of course, the really obvious one is self-checkout. Patrons don't have to come to the desk when they're ready to check out. They can go to self-checkout stations, which is really terrific because if you want to go talk to somebody, you still can, but you have the option of doing things on your own. And I'm an introvert, so I really like this option. I like using the self-checkout at the grocery store. I like using the self-checkout at libraries. I think this is terrific. Instant returns, and we talked a little bit about why this is great when you accidentally leave your disc at home, but another great part of instant returns is it has to do with material limits. So for instance, at the library where I work, we have a 10 DVD limit. Each patron can have 10 at a time. So we'll have patrons who come every week and they'll check out 10 DVDs, go home and watch them, come back the next week, and then before we had our RFID applications, they would just dump them into a return bin and then go to get 10 more DVDs. The problem with that is when they came back, we usually hadn't checked in their items yet. There were these great big bins full of items still needing to be checked in, so when they'd try to check out, they'd be blocked. Their accounts would say they already had 10 items out. So we'd end up having to go fish through these bins, trying to find the particular items that these patrons returned to check them in so they could check out some more. It was frustrating for us, it was frustrating for the patrons, and so instant returns is actually really a terrific feature. And then, of course, we have automatic sortation. This is not necessary for an RFID system, but it is something that allows, RFID allows automatic sortation to happen. I have pictured here the Linkso sorter at the Salt Lake City Library System. And what's happening on here is these books, their RFID tags are being read as they're being checked in either by patrons or by library staff. And then the sorter automatically dumps them into bins with like materials. So for instance, we have a bin that holds the 8 and 900s, and we have one that has young adult fiction, and we have one that has all of the children's audiovisual, and we just have a bunch of bins in different categories, and that makes it go a lot faster when we're trying to get these things sorted and put back onto the shelves. Really reduces the amount of time that we use there. Of course, theft prevention is a classic part of RFID technology. We're all familiar with the gates at the front of grocery stores, and now a lot of libraries have them as well. These are the electromagnetic zones that have the RFID readers, and as patrons walk through there, if the item hasn't been checked out, the alarm goes off. So we know when something is potentially stolen, or if somebody just forgot to check it out properly, and we can go in and help get it fixed. Expedited inventory is another great reason to use this. At this one and the next one also as well. Efficient shelf reading and lost item recovery. These are a library's dream come true. Doing inventory and doing shelf reading are some of the most tedious tasks in a library. Librarians do not like to do them, but they're necessary. For instance, when we're trying to do inventory, we have to go through and mark each individual item and keep really careful records. Well, with RFID, you can take a handheld reader and just run it down the shelves. It will take a digital imprint of what's on the shelves and just drop it into a list for you for your inventory. It can also read the information on the tags to let you know if any of the column numbers are out of order and give you a little alert when it finds something out of order. So if your shelves are a little bit messy, you can resort them and get them in nice shape, or if it finds something that belongs in another place altogether, it'll give you this little alert that something's out of order and you can find these books that have been misshelved. this maybe isn't a huge perk in a small library system, but in my library system we have almost 1,000,000 items throughout the system, and in my building alone we have around 500,000. At any given time about half of those are checked out, but that's still a lot of items that we have to go through. If we've misshelved a book, we'll never find it again. And so this RFID technology is really wonderful for inventory and shelf reading. Patrons like it too. Self-checkout means shorter lines. So when you do have to talk to somebody, you can't do everything yourself. The lines are much shorter because you don't have a lot of people who only need to check out. They can do that on their own, so you can get to see somebody much quicker. Reduced processing and reshelving time is also a benefit of the RFID. That sortation process makes it go much faster, so these items are available more quickly back on the shelves for the patrons. This is especially a big deal when it's new releases and really hot items. People want to get those as fast as possible, so the less time they can spend in our hands and the more they can spend in the patrons' hands, the better. And then, of course, reduced anxiety over sensitive materials. This is probably my favorite part about RFID. It actually, in one way, makes privacy easier. Because if patrons have something that they might be sort of embarrassed to check out, it might deter them from doing it. If they have to bring me a book about irritable bowel syndrome and have me check it out for them, they might just decide they don't want it after all. But if they can do a self-checkout, they don't even have to take it out of the bag. They can just put the bag with the books they want up into the scanning zone, and it will check out regardless of whether anybody can see the books that they have. So in that way, it really is nice for patrons because they at least feel like nobody can see what they're checking out. But a patron's materials may not be as private as they'd like to think they are. One of the major problems with RFID is that it's vulnerable to inconspicuous collection of information. Anybody who has an RFID reader can pick up information from an RFID tag, and they're everywhere. Muir points out, RFID tags present a more significant threat than eavesdropping on our cell phones because the readers are so readily available and can be universally deployed. You can buy RFID readers all over the place. There's no regulation for them, so anybody can scan what's in your bag and see what items you've been checking out at the library. The ability to scan what's in the bag can also enable movement tracking. So if somebody knows what's in your bag, they can track what buildings you go into. If any of them have RFID scanners in the doorways, they can track where you're going. There are places on highways and streets where you can pay tolls with RFID-enabled credit cards, and those can also pick information up from your books so people can tell where you're traveling. It's a lot of information that can be collected from just carrying around books that are emitting RFID waves. Another issue is hot listing. It is possible to make lists of certain books, and anybody who checks out these books are people to be watched, and anytime you see this book, you want to find out what's happening with the person who's carrying it around. So the fact that you've checked out one particular book, maybe the Anarchist Cookbook, might mean that somebody monitors you for as long as you're holding this book. Hand in hand with hot listing is profiling. You may find yourself on a list based on what you've checked out. For instance, maybe you decided to read a biography of John Hinckley, and now suddenly the NSA is watching you for possible terrorist activity or threats against the president. That's the sort of thing that you might see happening. And profiling doesn't necessarily have to be from the government. Let's say that you're checking out diet books. Someone may read that information and decide that you are a prime target for Nutrisystem ads or something like that. Profiling can come from a lot of different places, and remember, these ads are everywhere. With broader numbers, maybe you're walking into a Target store and Target is finding out that a lot of people are bringing diet books into the store, so maybe they decide they should run a promotion, a nice big visible promotion for diet materials that they sell. and make that nice and visible based on trends that are coming through. Then we have system integration security risks. Now, RFID, libraries are not making these. They're not manufacturing RFID. That's really not the business they're in. So they have to contract with a vendor in order to get RFID materials and software, and they have to kind of integrate systems with other vendors. And that's always an issue. I'm remembering an article from earlier that pointed to system integration as one of the major issues for cybersecurity risks. So that's always something to consider. There may be backdoors into your private systems. There may be sort of holes in the security that you think are covered but just have not been found. That's always an option, or always a possibility when you're talking about system integration. And then finally, there's just censorship through fear. The fact that people can monitor what you're reading might change what you're reading. Caldwell Stone says, if individuals know or suspect that their intellectual activities are subject to examination by the government or other third parties, they are unlikely to fully exercise their constitutional right to read and receive ideas, information, and points of view. And this is particularly important when what you want to read challenges the prevailing hegemonies. If you're afraid that people will think that you're trying to overthrow their structures, then maybe you just don't challenge them. Maybe you don't pick up this information. And that's one of the major things that libraries have always tried to protect. We want people to be able to read whatever it is, regardless of whether it challenges the power structures that are in place. But you may find yourself asking, who really cares what I'm reading? I mean, so I'm reading another teen paranormal romance. Who even cares? Why should I be totally worked up about that? I mean, I use Goodreads. I announce all over my Facebook page what I'm reading all the time. So why should I be all that anxious about people collecting this information from me? And who would bother taking the time to collect it? And there are some sort of obvious ones for certain situations. Maybe your spouse isn't crazy about the idea that you might be picking up Divorce for Dummies. They might really like to know whether you're checking out How to Cheat and Not Get Caught. But there are some more broadly applicable situations where people might really want this information about you. And one of those would be opportunists. As a group, opportunists would really like this information. Now, these would be con artists, people who collect information about you in order to take advantage of you. I have pictured on the side a psychic. That's one of those professions that's sort of fraught with fraud. You just kind of assume that there are going to be people in this profession who are going to be trying to gather as much information about you as possible so that they can make deductions and impress you with the things that they know about you. And the more they can glean from you on first sight, the more they can sort of fool you into believing that they have some sort of extrasensory perception. So if you have maybe a psychic or a faith healer who's putting these RFID readers in the doors when you walk in, they can discover things about you based on what you're carrying, and they can deduce things about you that might convince you that they're more than they are. Another example of this would be pyramid salesmen. They really depend on building a rapport with someone in order to get them involved in a pyramid scheme. Excuse me. So you'll find somebody who's just looking for a way to engage you in conversation and really get you to open up, get you to let your guard down. And a book is a great way to do that. If they get you talking about literature that you're interested in, then that might open you up to be more susceptible to this sales pitch. I really like you and I want to bring you in on this opportunity. That's always something that you want to be careful about. And having a conversation about something that you're fond of, familiar with, can make you less careful. The next group who would like this information is data aggregators. People collect data for all kinds of things all the time, and they are tremendously creative in the ways that they put this data together to get information. I'm remembering this article that we read about the possible applications of wearable technologies, collecting it for corporate spying or the like. But that one was hypothetical, but there are things that are actually being done with RFID to track behaviors in people. there were a couple of grocery stores who wanted to know about people's shopping behavior, and so they put RFID tags on carts and they placed readers around the store in order to track people's paths, to figure out where they tended to go first, where they spent a lot of time. The sections of the store that had a lot of people visiting them were the busiest, most active, and they would do this in order to try and sell you extra things or figure out where to put promotional materials. This should be pretty familiar. It's pretty rare to walk into a store and see the milk at the front of the store, because that's one of the things that large numbers of people buy very frequently, and so that's a high traffic area. So they'll put that at the back of the store in the hopes that you will pass by other things that you weren't really thinking about, glance at them and think, oh sure, I want that too, and buy a little bit more than you had necessarily intended to. In fact, when I was doing my reading, I discovered an article about libraries who wanted to use RFID to discover information-seeking behavior. So this is not just the corporate world, this is in libraries too. We are using this information to track people, to learn things about them, in order to adjust our own services. And then, of course, there are government agencies. It seems... Well, I don't know if it seems like this anymore. It always sounded like this big paranoid conspiracy theory. The government's watching us. And then we've discovered so much about what the NSA is doing lately that maybe we don't look down on people who are scared of this anymore. Muir points out, law enforcement and investigatory agencies have sought out information about library agencies in the past, and there's no reason to believe that it will not occur under stronger auspices under the stronger auspices of the Patriot Act or through other legal means. And basically, while we've blocked government from trying to get our records before, what we're kind of doing with RFID is handing them this interesting sort of workaround to figure out what people are checking out, even if they can't get to our records. They just have to have an RFID reader in the right place, and they can figure out what our patrons are getting. So that's a huge concern, and we know that it's not a naive concern. This is something that our government has come looking for before, and they probably won't stop looking for it. So what can we do then as librarians to help protect our patron privacy? That's always been a huge tenet of libraries, is we want to protect privacy. And here we are using these technologies that are so great for us, but add these extra risks. So we need to come up with ways that we can look out for our patrons using these. And there are a few things that we can do. They're not perfect, but they're certainly, they mitigate the risk. And one of the big ones is to never ever use RFID technology in library cards. The reason is that would give personal information to the RFID readers. Where you're just looking at books, you can't necessarily tell that much about a person. But if you're using RFID technology in the library cards themselves, they would be linked to accounts that have addresses, phone numbers, email address, driver's license information, all kinds of data about the patron's personal life that can be used for identity theft or purposes like that. And so that is absolutely one of the things that we cannot do. We cannot use RFID technology in library cards. Unfortunately, this makes that IBM commercial kind of a pipe dream. If our suspicious looking friend can't walk through those doors and have his personal payment information read by the gates, then he can't do this simple scanning process where all he has to do is walk outside in order to check out and pay for his items. And okay, that's too bad. It sort of destroys the fun of that commercial, but it is really important for privacy that we can't collect that kind of information immediately. This was one of the rules that was broken by the University of Utah when they gave me that student ID with RFID. That linked directly to my student profile so that they could just turn off the ability to get on the bus whenever I wanted. That meant that I was actually following the rules and I wasn't using the transit when I wasn't paying tuition, but it also made my details available to anybody who had an RFID reader, and that was kind of dangerous. Another thing that we should be doing is using passive tags with short reading range. So let me talk a little bit about active and passive RFID tags. Active tags are ones that are constantly emitting the radio frequency, and they can be picked up by any reader, even one that's not sending out instructions to send these radio frequencies out. Passive tags only send a frequency when they're told to. So when they enter an electromagnetic zone for a reader that's saying, give me information all the time, the reader's the active one. It sends out instructions to send information, and a passive tag, when it receives those instructions, will emit the radio frequency with the information on it. So there are passive readers. They will only receive data that's being pushed out to them. And so this is not great. There are plenty of active readers out there, and it's not going to protect our patrons very much, but it may reduce information that's just being sent out there for passive tags to collect. Like I said, it's just not that strong of a help, but we'll do whatever we can. So using passive tags has become pretty standard in libraries. We can use unique identifiers in place of the title and author of the book. So basically, instead of programming the article or the title of the book with Stephen King Pet Cemetery, we can program it with a letter number combination that in our system is interpreted to mean Stephen King Pet Cemetery. So that person, when they're going out and walking past readers, they're just emitting this random letter number combination that doesn't mean anything to those readers. It only means something to our system because we can interpret that to mean what we want it to mean. Very, very similar to that is encrypting the tag data. If we're only sending out messages that have to be decrypted, opportunists are much less likely to be able to decrypt them. There may be people who can crack that, but it takes a lot more effort to go in and crack that information. So encrypting is always a really good idea. Password protection is also a possibility with RFID tags. So a tag may only surrender its information when the RFID reader sends it out a specific signal, the password in this case. So if you don't know the password that the library is using to program your reader with, you don't know how to get that information from a library tag. This is not very widely used. Password protection is fairly new. It hasn't been implemented, especially in older systems. So not a lot of libraries are using this, but this would be a really good way to protect information of our patrons if there's a very specific code that we have to receive in order for our tags to surrender their data. And then another big thing that we should be doing is notifying patrons of RFID use and its risks. A lot of our patrons, they understand that they can pass a book over a scanner and get it to check out, but they don't necessarily know what's involved in that, what's happening to make it check out, and where the potential risks are with those radio frequencies. So it's a good idea if we have information everywhere patrons might need it, near our checkout stands, on our websites, all over the place, so that they understand what's happening and they know where the vulnerabilities are. And then it's possible that we could provide RFID shielding bags or jammers at the library. I know my library sells tote bags that are just a couple of dollars, and they're not big sellers. They're not there to make us money, but sometimes people want a bag, and so we'll sell them bags. We could do this with RFID materials. They're a little more expensive, but we could do it in a cost-effective way where we're not trying to make money off it, we're just providing it to them. Now, this is kind of funny because here we are creating this great big system, part of which is an anti-theft system, and then we're giving our patrons ways to thwart it. It does seem a little bit futile, but it would certainly be something that would protect our patrons, and it would help mitigate that fear factor, that soft censorship through fear. Because if our patrons know that their data can be read, they might be really anxious about checking things out unless they have this handy little bag that will keep their data from being read. And it's not hard to shut down the readings from a radio frequency transmitter. I know that at my library, if a book has a metallic reflective cover, then a lot of times we can't read it. So it's not that hard to just get in the way of those radio frequencies, and there's quite a large market of people who are doing that. So selling these these radio frequency blocking bags. So it is something that we could do. Again, it sort of defeats some of the purposes of the RFID system that we put in place, but it still might not be a terrible idea. Our patrons do kind of deserve to have a solution for the problem that we're creating for them. I want to leave you with this thought from Muir. Libraries are a driving force in RFID technology, and librarians have a responsibility to ensure this technology is implemented in a manner that does not violate our patrons' trust in us. Libraries have a reputation for being defenders of privacy, and our patrons trust us to keep the information that they're giving us confidential, to make sure that it's not shared with other agencies. And with this RFID technology, we're sort of breaking that trust. We need to do as much as we can to keep that information out of the hands of third parties, because our patrons believe that that's what we're doing. They really understand, or at least they think, that we are taking care of their privacy and looking out for them. And if we're not doing that, we're violating a very deep trust. This is a place where we need to be very careful. We need to make sure that we are always working with our patrons' best interests in mind.